G'day and welcome back to the channel. My name's Grant Frost and I'm an Australian trained musculoskeletal physiotherapist who's really passionate about trying to better understand the hidden root underlying causes of common aches, pains and dysfunctions. And in today's video, we're going to turn our attention to arch dysfunction. And in this video, I want to show you what you need to consider if you want to permanently fix your arch dysfunction by not only going after some common arch related exercises, but also taking a bigger step back and trying to understand arch dysfunction is really just a foot problem, it's a leg problem. So as we go through this video, I want to show you the broader mechanism that may be setting your arches up to fail. I want to have a brief conversation about what role, if any, orthotics and arch supportive shoes may have in your arch recovery process. But potentially more importantly, I want to show you the mobility and strength exercises that you may need to do in order to optimize your ability to improve your arch function, but also the environment that it exists within. So let's get into it. So when trying to better understand what you may need to do to permanently fix your flat feet or collapsed arches, there's one really important concept that we need to make sure that we double down on. And that is, in most instances, an arch collapsing is often the consequence of your entire leg almost de-rotating inwards. As you may be able to see here, if I keep my feet straight and I create some external rotation through my legs without my big toes coming off the ground, you'll see very clearly that the arch of my foot will lift up. And if I go the other way and I de-rotate my entire leg, my arch will collapse. Now, obviously, it's not as simple to say that you aren't rotated out enough and that you are rotated in too much as the cause of your arch dysfunction, but it's this mechanism that we need to keep in the back of our minds, because there's certain features that we can develop thanks to the modern world in terms of ankle flexibility, hip mobility and strength that can ask our entire leg to compensate for, ultimately resulting in an arch that wants to collapse. We can get a good representation of this just by watching how you squat. In a perfect world, an ideal squat shape requires you to have normal flexibility, and from that we want you to have your feet straight with your big toes on the ground. From here, if you create some external rotation where you rotate your knees outwards and pull your arches up, if you squat down from this position, in a perfect world nothing should change. But if you get down into a squat and you feel like your feet naturally want to turn out, or as you come down your knees naturally want to cave in, these two mechanisms facilitate your arch collapsing at the same time. So if you're someone who walks around and you look down and you see that your feet are turned out, when you're walking forwards, essentially what you're encouraging your foot and ankle to do is, instead of having your feet straight and walking in a linear plane through your second toe, if you've turned your feet outwards, because you're still moving forwards, it now becomes very easy for you to walk through your arch and through the inside of your big toe, again perpetuating this idea of an arch that's wanting to collapse. And then from this point, we want to bring two other pieces into this conversation. The first is that we don't want to judge how good your arch is functioning just by looking at it. There are absolutely different genetics whose arches are more naturally flatter visually. But the idea that we need to divorce here is that just because your arch looks visually flatter or higher doesn't necessarily guarantee that it's not functioning correctly. You may know that the function of the arch creates what we call a windlass effect, where when you walk forwards and your big toe bends, the bones and the mechanism in your foot creates this arch to turn our foot from this supple, malleable structure into a more rigid structure for us to propel ourselves forward. So if we can base the success of this not necessarily on the visual aspect of your arch, although you can certainly improve how it looks visually by going through this process, as always, we need to judge this on function. Because the other side of this conversation that we need to talk about is, if you are someone that has had arch dysfunction, flat feet, collapsed arches for long enough that the actual arch structure in your foot has started to degrade, perhaps the ligaments have become stretched, maybe there's some bony dysfunction of the bones of the arch, there may be a tipping point that you cannot come back from if you've gone too far past it. So in the spirit of making a video about how to permanently fix your arch dysfunction, the real conversation here is, what can we do to optimize the arch function of your foot while at the same time optimizing the function of your leg overall to see where we can get you. But what I do find clinically is, if we just look at your arch function in isolation and we don't consider the broader context that gives that arch dysfunction meaning, then it may be unrealistic to expect this to improve over time forever. And the first exercise that we're going to go through, again, isn't an arch corrective exercise. We're going to go looking through your ankle joint for any ankle joint restrictions. So as I've spoken about before, we can't think of your arch dysfunction as a foot problem. We need to consider it in the context of your broader leg, this closed system, to look for clues as to why that arch is wanting to collapse when it shouldn't. And clinically, one of the main reasons why I find an arch wants to collapse is that the next most mobile structure, which is your ankle joint, is restricted. And again, why this is meaningful is if we're doing something like a basic squat movement, in an ideal world, in a linear plane with your feet straight, your body should have the capacity to move through your tissue unencumbered. But if you are lacking some ankle range of motion and you need to move your leg beyond what you currently have available to you, instead of being able to get to here, let's just say that you can only get to here, the only way that your body can get around that so you can still complete your task is by either turning your foot out so you can go past it, or if your feet stay straight, your whole leg has to dump inwards again to go past that restriction. And it's this going around that restriction which again can collapse an arch consistently over time. So logically, if we aren't hunting around your ankle joint for any capsular restrictions or soft tissue restrictions, then we may never be able to create a better environment for your arch to function more comfortably. But for this video, ankle capsular restrictions tend to be missed a lot. So this is one I think we might need to focus on more than others. But how that looks is we want to take a band, a power band. You can use a TheraBand if you want to. It doesn't matter what you use. You just want to make sure that it's secured to something sturdy. We want to have the band below the bones at your ankle. And we want to take that band out as far as you feel comfortable. We can then stretch the other leg out, leaving that back ankle behind. All we want to do here, we want to find a way for you to gently bend and flex that ankle with the band pulling behind you. Again, paying attention that when you do this, you're not just working around that restriction all the time. You want to make sure that your big toe stays down. You rotate your leg outwards in the same way that we showed before with that ideal squat shape. And we're essentially oscillating out through the outer side of your foot and toes rather than the big toe and on the inside of your arch. So create that rotation. Go through that ankle stiffness, don't let your body go around it. If we can do this for 30 seconds, 60 seconds, 2 minutes, what you should then find straight away is that when you come back to something as simple as your squat shape, you should feel that that ankle is a little bit lighter and a little bit looser than it felt beforehand. The next thing that we need to look for is we need to come all the way up to your hip to make sure that you're not missing any hip external rotation, which allows you more movement options away from that internally rotated position. And we're looking to improve your hip's ability to externally rotate. A really simple and convenient way to do that is utilizing a bed or a chair. All we want you to do here is if you can place your leg up onto a structure or a surface. If your knee is uncomfortable here, you're welcome to slide your foot off the side just to take the tension out of your knee. But what we're looking for here is that we're in this externally rotated shape. Being up nice and tall from your hips, we want you to take your hips back as you lean over the top of your leg. If you can reach down to touch the bed, that's completely fine. If not, you're welcome to rest on your leg. We want you to go as deep as you can until you start to feel some tightness in the backside of your hip. Just know that we want to make this hinge through your hip, and for me, I can get to here. I can go infinitely deeper than that, but the movement's now coming from my back, and that's not necessarily what we're looking for. So we're not judging the effectiveness of this by how far your head and shoulders go, but how far you can hinge your hip while keeping your back straight before you find some tightness in that hip. And then from here, we can get you to gently twist towards your knee or gently twist towards your foot to try and find which version of this gives you the best access to some of that hidden hip restriction that you may not have realized was there. Wherever your tightness is, we want to try and tense that tightness up. Give it a squeeze for 5 to 10 seconds. It creates this wonderful reflex in your brain that when you squeeze it for 5 to 10 seconds, maintain the position, but then relax, that reflex will automatically allow that tissue to give to some degree straight away. And what that means is you may then be able to drop your back leg down deeper. You might be able to drop forward a little bit further or twist a little bit more before you find that same tightness. We can keep repeating that process, keep chasing that tightness until you feel like it starts to free up. And then as we did before, when we come back to something like that squat shape, it should automatically feel like you have more hip rotation range of motion at your disposal, making it easier for you to stay out of that arch collapsed shape and more into an arch supportive shape. If you find that doing it standing on a bed is either inconvenient or too hard, we can absolutely do the same thing in sitting. We're up nice and tall, coming over the top, twisting from side to side, giving it a squeeze and repeating that process. But ultimately, by feeding some slack into your leg through your ankle and through your hip, it can start to optimize general leg mechanics from which your arch should benefit long term. But one of the important things that we need to consider with this is just improving your range of motion, while potentially really beneficial, will only be half the issue if we're not trying to strengthen you in that range so that your body can maintain that position better. So the next exercise we want to go through is just a really simple squat exercise with a band. So once you've started to find and remove some of those hidden handbrakes that may be stopping you from expressing normal range of motion and asking your legs to get into a position that compromises your arch function, once you've reclaimed some of that mobility, we still want to train your musculature and your tissue to hold that position while you're doing the things that are meaningful to you. And a really simple way to do that is with the basic squat shape that we've already talked about, but we can improve on it by using a band. And the classic way to do this is, again, having your feet straight, keep those big toes on the ground, and imagine that you're screwing your legs into the ground. Imagine that you're turning your knees outwards, and again, visually, you should see that the arches of your feet will lift up from this position. You should also feel that the muscles in your hips, those hip external rotators, are also engaging to twist your legs from above. Now, we want to maintain that tension in a comfortable way, and then flexibility permitting, we want you to drop your hips back and down as deep as you feel you can go before you feel like you run out of your range of motion. Now, in a perfect world, if we had no ankle restrictions, no hip restrictions, I'm not perfect, but you should be able to get pretty much all the way down without feeling like you need to lift your heels up, turn your feet out, round your lower back, or even fall backwards. But from the perspective of optimal technique, we just want you to go down to a depth that you feel you can maintain that integrated system and train your body to get used to that. 3 sets of 10, 3 sets of 15. At the end of the day, we want fatigue. We want fatigue through your hips, through your quads, even through some of the muscles in your calf as they assist you in this process. Once that becomes a little bit easier and you've mastered that technique, we can then grab a booty band or again, another TheraBand. We can tie that around your knees to again, give us some resistance against that external rotation mechanism. And then same rules apply, feet straight, big toes on the ground, screw those knees out. You'll feel the tension in the band when you do this. Again, we want to maintain that tension. We want to stop the band from trying to de-rotate the leg and get those knees to dump inwards. Adding a band will significantly increase the demands on your hips. But again, we're trying to work on your leg as a whole to again, bring your arch up from above. And once you feel you've mobilized some of the ankle and hip restrictions and you're starting to cultivate that pattern a little bit better, we can also add into this the very important arch-specific exercises to try and strengthen the mechanism itself. So naturally, we don't just want to try and treat potential broader leg mechanics and not touch the arch of your foot. Like anything, we still need to give you a symptomatic exercise that you can do to try and strengthen and reclaim the arch itself, while you're also working on the broader context that may have caused that to be necessary in the first place. And if you've been combing through the internet for arch strengthening exercises, there's one really simple one that you've probably come across before. It's called a short foot exercise or doming. And all it requires you to do is it requires you to have your foot on the ground. You want to make sure that you keep your big toe down. We want to make sure that you've got some pressure on your heel outside of your foot. And essentially what we're trying to do is we're trying to squeeze your foot and sort of pull the arch of your foot up. So when you're sitting down and you're in a bit of a neutral shape, it can feel a little bit easier to try and pull the ball of your big toe towards your heel and really squeeze that arch as best as you can. We're going to try and hold that for 2 or 3 seconds. At the end of the day, we just want to experience as much fatigue through that foot as possible, because again, fatigue is the stimulus that tells your body that it needs to get better. If you are someone who has had arch dysfunction for long enough where the structure of your foot has degraded, the ligaments, the bones, the soft tissues have given to a degree, and structurally you are now just different. Again, we don't necessarily want to judge the success of this by how much you feel your arch raises up. What we're looking for is we're looking for that activation of the musculature. So if you don't see a visual sort of arch raising when you do it, but when you dig your fingers into your arch and you pull your big toe towards your heel and you feel that tension in the area, then you're still doing something meaningful. Again, again, we don't know visually how your arch will look at the end of this process, but if we're optimizing the function of the area, then a lot of the dysfunction that you feel in the form of shin splints, Achilles problems, other foot problems will hopefully improve regardless. Another way that you can do this is if you can grab a towel, place your foot on the towel, where you are literally trying to use predominantly your big toe, but really pull that towel towards you. Again, optimizing the function of your arch and trying to fatigue that tissue. If you don't have a towel, you can just do this on carpet or on a floor. It's the friction and the resistance that something like a towel offers that really helps generate that fatigue under the arch of your foot. And then once you spend some time working through the arch of your foot as well as the other structures above your foot, we definitely need to now have a conversation about what orthotics and arch supportive shoes may mean for you. So easily one of the most common conversations that I have and a lot of people in my industry have about flat feet and collapsed arches is what role, if any, do orthotics and arch supports play? And the reason why I wanted to talk about this at the end of the video is that hopefully, as you can appreciate through the steps that we've already gone through, if one of the main contributing reasons for why your arch dysfunction is dysfunction higher up in the leg, where your body isn't holding your arch up from above, then the concept of putting something underneath your arch to stop it from collapsing suddenly changes how we think about this dysfunction. Because as we know from general architecture, arches are not a weight-bearing surface, they are the weight-bearing surface. So for you to then use an insole or an arch supportive shoe to try and support a collapsed arch from above, it may absolutely help improve the symptoms that you may be getting from a collapsed arch. Maybe if you have some Achilles problems or some plantar fasciitis and you support your arch from underneath, forcing your arch into a more optimal position may help your symptoms feel better. But the catch is that while we're stopping your arch from collapsing, we're not stopping your arch from wanting to collapse. We're not fixing the cause of that collapse. So as you may know, if you've had supportive shoes or orthotics for so long, as soon as you are in a situation where you can't use your orthotics, walking on the beach, or you've just gotten out of bed and you're walking to the toilet or around the house, orthotics are only useful for the time that you're wearing your orthotics. One of the main issues that I have with insoles and orthotics and arch supportive shoes is that they are absolutely a very good and potentially helpful short-term thing to use. Where we fail you a lot is that when we give you an orthotic or say, here, you need to use this to make yourself feel better, what we need to do instead is, instead of saying, this is now you forever, we need to give you that short-term device, tell you that it's a short-term device, and then also give you something to do beyond that that progresses you to the stage where you don't feel you need that device anymore. And whether it's ankle flexibility or hip restriction or hip muscle control, if you are missing something higher up the chain, then you will never give yourself the best chance to optimize how your arch is functioning if you don't go looking for that dysfunction. And finally, when we come to a conversation about what type of footwear is best for you, no conversation around arch dysfunction is complete unless we genuinely talk about flip-flops or thongs here in Australia. Not only are these insanely comfortable and convenient to wear, but as soon as you put your big toe into a pair of thongs or flip-flops, you will automatically be short-circuiting the function of your foot. As soon as you redirect the function of your toe away from contributing to the function of your arch to holding the thong on your foot, then you are literally and figuratively taking steps towards arch dysfunction. But if you have an opportunity to avoid using flip-flops or thongs, and again, opt for maybe a more self-securing sandal, or at least one that doesn't require your big toe to keep it on your foot, that can be another fantastic way to give your arches a chance to function more normally, especially in the warmer weather if you're in these a lot. But as always, I genuinely hope that that perspective was helpful and hopefully enlightening and meaningful. If you found the video helpful and insightful, let me know by leaving a like on the video and consider subscribing to the channel if you want to hear more about the root underlying causes that I'm finding with common dysfunctions. But again, as always, thank you for watching and hope to see you next time. Bye.